Now, John Bowlby's theory of the attachment stages made sense for a lot of us, but not all of us. And so the work of Mary Ainsworth, a Canadian-born American scientist, discovered there was individual differences in attachment. That is, in some families, separation between a parent and an infant had different types of responses. Maybe the infant didn't do a protest cry sometimes. Maybe an infant didn't see the parent as a secure base right away. And so these individual differences were tested out in her research known as the strange situation, where she developed certain types of infant attachments. Later on, this was built upon by Mary Main, who looked at the transgenerational effects of attachment and how infant attachment can really spill over into our adult attachment types and spill over into what type of parent we will be. So how you were attached to your own parent may influence how you'll be attached to your own children someday. So we'll get into the strange situation. Just a bit of a recap if you haven't seen this before. So the original work by Mary Ainsworth was the idea that it had a series of steps, including 2 separations and 2 reunions. In step 1, the caregiver and an infant would enter a research lab, and the research lab would be a basic, usually a square-ish room, enough room to move around. You want to have a large research room, not just simply one table in a small room, but a large research room. So the infant and the caregiver enter the room, and what we're looking for at this stage is sort of how they react to each other, if they're making a lot of eye contact, if they're responding to each other's emotional bids. At stage 2, the infant is given some time and space to explore the room, and we usually try and put some novel and interesting toys in the room. And so what we're looking for here is to see, does the infant wander over to the toys? If they do, how fast do they do it? Or do they stay tightly clinging to their caregiver? In stage 3, this is when we have a stranger enter the lab. And we usually try and pair the stranger with the caregiver's gender, and if we can, roughly their age or other demographic variables. So in stage 3, what we're looking for here is the stranger starts off, they just kind of enter the room kind of quietly. Then after they're there for a few minutes, they may attempt to initiate interaction with the infant. And what we're looking for is to see how the infant responds. Does the infant go along and start playing with the stranger? Do they ignore the stranger? Do they run back to the caregiver? Do they just look at the caregiver in the eyes to do social referencing to see what this caregiver would anticipate they do? Then in step 4, the parent gets up and they leave the room. And when the caregiver is gone, what we're looking at here is to see what happens with the infant. The caregiver leaves, the stranger will attempt to comfort the infant if need be, and we see how the infant responds to the absence of the caregiver and how the infant responds to the attempts to comfort by the stranger. And so sometimes we may find that the infant is easily comforted by the stranger, that they're okay with this. Sometimes we might find that they're not. There's nothing that the stranger can do to comfort them. And sometimes we may find that infants don't seem to care. They don't care that their caregiver is gone. They're happy. They're already invested in their playing, or they might not even notice. In step 5, the parent re-enters and the stranger leaves. And what we're looking for in this stage, if the infant was upset, do they calm down? How easily do they calm down? Are they frustrated and upset with the parent? Or do they soothe and welcome the parent back happily? Or are they totally dismissive of the parent? Do they totally not even notice that the parent has returned? Maybe they're so invested in playing. Then in step 6, we're looking at the second separation. And so the second separation is when the parent leaves again, the stranger was already out of the room, and now the infant is left completely alone in the room. This is usually the briefest part of the experiment because parents and infants usually cannot tolerate this stage very well. So with the infant completely alone in the room, how do they react? Do they cry the same amount they cried the first time? Do they cry more? Are they crying less? Or do they not notice? And so then in step 7, the stranger will re-enter and again try to comfort the infant. What we may notice in this stage is perhaps the infant was able to be comforted in the first separation, but now the stranger can comfort the infant in the second separation. And so this was a bit more of a stronger, more salient separation. So we look to see what's happening there. And then the final step is the second reunion, and this is when the caregiver enters the room for the final time, and we're looking to see if the baby can be soothed or how quickly they can be soothed, or if they're upset with the parent. So those are really the things we're checking out here in the strange situation. Now, depending upon the responses of the infant in the strange situation, Mary Ainsworth determined that there was 4 different types of infant attachment styles. And she called these type A, type B, type C, and type D. Now, type B is the most common, but we'll start off talking with what Mary Ainsworth called type A. So in type A attachment, this is what she called an insecure avoidant attachment style. This is when the infant would be very dismissive of the parent. This is the idea that they may go into the room and just start playing with toys right away. They don't really need the parent there. When the parent leaves, they don't even notice. When the parent comes back, they don't even notice. They might go up to the stranger very quickly, or they might avoid all people altogether. And so this seems to be a very independent baby. And so this accounted for about 20% of North American infants. And some of them, this is okay. Sometimes this is just a sign that they're just particularly independent or unconcerned. But sometimes we may find that this may be a marker that they feel that they can't trust their parent. They've learned to grow indifferent and independent of their parent because the parent hasn't been someone they could trust. And so this is the idea that maybe their emotional bids have been ignored throughout most of their infancy. Maybe there's been a lot of low eye contact. Maybe their parents have just spent less time with them. Sometimes this could be a cultural thing in that they may live in a culture where babies are just more independent from a younger age. But sometimes this could be a marker that they just feel they can't trust anybody. With type A infants, Mary Main would suggest that these type A infants may grow up to be what's called dismissive adults. These are the adults that feel they have to not wear their heart on the sleeve. They must protect it. They can't be vulnerable to other people. They don't need other people in their life. So these are the people that grow up to be kind of distant from the other relationships in their life. They don't openly disclose. They don't get very emotionally intimate with other people. And they want to just be self-reliant. This could be a good thing, or this could be a maladaptive thing, depending on how extreme it could be. Now, sometimes dismissive adults are okay. They're happy being on their own, and there's nothing wrong with a bit of solitude. In a very extreme form, these types of individuals as adults may be uncomfortable in intimate relationships. They may be uncomfortable with commitment or being interdependent with another person. And so when these individuals who are dismissive have their own children, what can often happen is they've learned not to trust other people and not to be vulnerable, so they are less likely to be vulnerable with their kids. And they're more likely to be that kind of a standoffish parent. You go do the kid stuff, I'll go do the grown-up stuff, we'll meet up once a week for dinner sort of thing. And so they don't really have a close relationship with their parent, and they think this type of distant relationship is the ideal type of relationship. They believe that this is how relationships are supposed to be. You go do your own stuff, I'll go do my own stuff, see you. And they just think they can be hands-off. The most common type of infant attachment is type B, and this was what Mary Ainsworth called the secure base. And this accounted for about 60% of North American infants. And so this infant was following a very typical pattern. They were in that stage 3 with the protest cries, meaning at both separation times, the infant would become distressed and do the protest cry in the absence of their caregiver, but when their caregiver returned, they were very calm and comforted very easily. As soon as they saw their parent return, they anticipated their return, they saw them entering the room again, and they became very happy. And so this is the idea that they view their parents as a secure base. So this is like home base. As long as my parents okay, then I'm okay. If my parents here and they're happy, I'm okay. These infants do a lot of what we call social referencing. Social referencing is the idea that they check in to see how their parent is reacting to things. If their parent is tense, they become tense. So if the parent was making small talk with the stranger and seemed pretty happy, these infants might approach the stranger more. If the parent was being really shy or anxious or distant from the stranger, the babies were less likely to play with the stranger. And so we see this in a lot of relationships where if you take the infant to a new and novel spot, they're going to check in with the parent to see, how do I react to this? Is this a happy thing, or should I be stressed out? Something the parents should be aware of. If you're going through things such as the coronavirus pandemic and you always have a look of concern on your face, your kids will pick up on this and they will think that they need to be concerned. If you're doing something and you're very happy and go lucky and you seem very relaxed, it's going to make your kids more relaxed. Now, Mary Main referred to this type of attachment as autonomous. And that's because as we get older, we start to view our relationships as this autonomous, healthy, mutual idea. This is the idea that both people in a relationship are whole people. They're not halves of a person. But when they link up, really good things can happen. So in this autonomous relationship style, you allow each other the flexibility to be who you are, to foster your own hobbies and interests, but you're also there for each other when you need each other. And a common type of description would be when these autonomous individuals become parents themselves, they will still check in with their own parents. This is the idea that they feel confident in their type of parenting, they're there and they're responsive to their infants, but once in a while they're unsure. So they'll reach out to a friend, or maybe they'll call their own parents and say, hey, this just sort of happened, what do you think about it? And they're okay just checking in once in a while. I find I'm living on the other side of the country from my own mom, and so once in a while I'll pick up the phone, I just do a brief little call, I'm like, hi, this just happened, what do you think about this? Or I am terrible in the kitchen, so I might call and say, I have no idea how to knead dough, can you help walk me through it? And I just reach out when I need something, but I don't need to call 3 times a day, I don't need to send emails every day. It's on an as needed basis, knowing that my mom's always there for me when I need my mom, and she knows I'm always there for her if she needs me. The next type of infant attachment is type C. This one has a couple different names. We've seen this in the literature as insecure resistant, insecure anxious, and insecure ambivalent. And so what's going on here is it characterizes about 10% of North American babies. And it's called anxious or ambivalent because in this strange situation, these infants become very distressed when the parent leaves. When the parent comes back, they're also upset. So they're upset when the parent leaves, but they're upset when the parent comes back. They're just always upset. And they may be called resistant because they're resistant to being calmed down when the parent comes back. So what happens is they want their parent to come back, but they're a bit angry or judgmental or have a grudge against their parent when their parent comes back. And so this is the idea that they're like, how could you leave me? How could you do this to me? And so these babies may be living in a culture where the separation of parent-infant is very rare, and the strange situation may have been the first time this separation ever occurred. Sometimes in some cultures, infants have never been separated from their parent before, and this is such a stressful situation, they don't know how to react. And so culturally, this has some flexibility. And so we find that perhaps if they're showing this at 12 months, by 14 months, they may not be showing this, or once they become a certain age, when it's more culturally appropriate to be separated from their parents, they will show a bit of a difference. And so this might be the idea that they just haven't been exposed to that separation yet. In some cases, we may find that this is a marker of a child who's going to be very clingy and very overdependent on their parent beyond what's considered age appropriate. And so we might find that they are very resistant to playing with the toys in the room. Maybe they just want to cling to their parent's leg the whole time. We may find that they're very resistant to talking or making eye contact with a stranger. And so these are infants that they really view their parents as their whole world, and they don't want to go beyond that. Of course, Mary Main found that these individuals may grow up to be very overly dependent and clingy in a lot of their relationships. And this is the idea that when they start to have friendships and when they start to have romantic partnerships, they may become especially intrusive. It's the idea that they really don't view themselves as a whole person that can function when they're single or alone. They need that other person in their life always. And so they may become very possessive, very jealous of the other partner, of their partner. So Mary Main would describe these people as becoming very preoccupied as they become older. Whether it's with friendships or romantic partnerships, they often don't view themselves as a whole. They view themselves completely dependent upon the other person, and they need the other person in order for them to have a sense of self. They need that partnership. So because of this, they may display more behaviors that are jealous and possessive of the other person. They might want to control them or know where they are or seek reassurance all the time. They may also, when they become parents themselves, become very preoccupied parents who are very intrusive towards their children and very overstimulating. This is the idea that they're frequently checking in with their kids, frequently asking and requiring their children's presence of them, and really wanting all the details of everything. So these are the parents that are really invested in their kids' lives. They really go the distance to help them meet all their goals, and to the point that the child's not really able to develop their own sense of autonomy here, because the parent can often be smothering them with love. Often a preoccupied parent is so insecure about the relationships. They're so scared their partner's going to leave them, their kids are going to leave them, that they invest in this really intensive monitoring system where they're constantly monitoring their kids, monitoring everybody around them, checking their social medias, and it can become very maladaptive, as you may expect. And then the fourth type, type D, is what's often called disorganized. This was a type that was found later than the first three, and it is a little bit more rare, accounting for about 5% of North American cases. And what's going on in the disorganized type is that there's no set behavioral pattern. These are infants that can't be classified as type A, B, or C, because sometimes they're upset, but sometimes they're not, and they tend to be marked by more confusion. What happens is the infant may want to go to the parent, but then they don't want to go. It's different than the ambivalent type C, who's angry when the parent returns, because we understand why they're angry. Type D, we're not really sure what's going on. In some types, this may mark a child who doesn't really understand the nature of the relationship yet, maybe they aren't that close with that caregiver yet. But also, sometimes type D is marked by the idea that the parent has responded to the infant in very different ways. Sometimes the parent responds to the infant with harsh anger, sometimes they respond to the infant with love, and so this may be a marker that the infant doesn't know what to expect from their parent. Sometimes they get love and sometimes they get abuse. Sometimes they are afraid of their parent and sometimes they're happy to see their parent. And so this may mark something where the parent acts in very spontaneous, unpredictable ways, and the infant doesn't know what to expect from the parent. It may also mark some atypical development in the child. It may mark that they don't really understand what's going on, or there may be some type of social processing difference or neurological difference in the child. But either way, the infant's responses are very inconsistent. Now, when this infant moves into adulthood, what we find is if this maintains, they have difficulty navigating relationships. They have difficulty understanding how relationships work. They have difficulty making their own romantic relationships. They may be someone who overdoes it and then backs away, and then they may be someone who just doesn't understand how to prioritize relationships. So we do tend to find type D is marked by this higher level of concern.